Somewhere in the United States Air Force today, a B-52 Stratofortress crew is preparing for a mission. The aircraft they will fly was likely built before their grandparents were born. The B-52 first flew in 1952. It entered service in 1955 during the presidency of Dwight Eisenhower, before the space race, before Vietnam, before most of the wars fought in the past 70 years had even begun. It is still flying today, and the Air Force plans to keep it flying until 2050. That means a single airframe design could remain in frontline military service for nearly 100 years. No fighter jet has done that. No aircraft carrier. No tank. In the entire history of military technology, nothing has matched what the B-52 has accomplished simply by refusing to become obsolete. This is the story of the bomber that never stopped flying.
Another world, sky.
The B-52 was designed for one purpose: to fly to the Soviet Union, deliver nuclear weapons, and, ideally, return home. In the early 1950s, the United States Strategic Air Command needed a bomber that could fly farther, carry more, and survive longer than anything that had come before. The B-36 Peacemaker, the aircraft the B-52 replaced, was a propeller-driven giant already approaching obsolescence in the jet age. Boeing's engineers set out to build something unprecedented: an 8-engine jet bomber capable of intercontinental range, capable of carrying the largest nuclear weapons in the American arsenal, capable of remaining airborne for entire days at a time with aerial refueling. The prototype YB-52 first flew on April 15, 1952. What Boeing had built was, and remains, one of the most capable aircraft ever constructed. Its wings, long, thin, and flexible, were designed to flex dramatically in flight, absorbing turbulence and stress in ways that rigid wings could not. Pilots described watching the wingtips flex up and down by several feet during flight, a design feature that looked alarming and functioned brilliantly. The B-52 entered service with Strategic Air Command in 1955. For the next decade, its mission was simple and terrifying: maintain a continuous airborne alert, with nuclear-armed B-52s in the sky 24 hours a day, ready to strike the Soviet Union within minutes of a presidential order. It was called Operation Chrome Dome. B-52s flew continuous patrols along routes that brought them close to Soviet airspace, loaded with nuclear weapons for years on end. The war it was built to fight never came, but the aircraft found other wars to fly. In June 1965, B-52s flew their first combat mission, not against the Soviet Union, but over Vietnam. The operation was called Arclight. It was a strange transformation for an aircraft designed for nuclear war. The B-52s that flew over Vietnam carried conventional bombs, enormous quantities of them, up to 70,000 pounds per aircraft, dropped from altitudes so high that the targets below never heard the aircraft coming. For the soldiers on the ground, American, South Vietnamese, and North Vietnamese alike, a B-52 strike was one of the most terrifying experiences of the war. There was no warning, no sound of approaching aircraft, just the sudden, earth-shaking impact of dozens of bombs walking across the landscape in seconds, followed by a deep, rolling thunder that arrived only after the bombs had already exploded. The crews flying these missions faced their own dangers. Vietnam's B-52 missions were flown from bases in Guam and Thailand, some requiring flights of over 10 hours round trip. Over the course of the war, North Vietnamese surface-to-air missiles shot down more than a dozen B-52s, proving that even America's most formidable bomber was not invulnerable. The most intense B-52 operation of the war came in December 1972, Operation Linebacker 2, often called the Christmas bombing. Over 11 days, B-52s flew more than 700 sorties against targets in North Vietnam, in the largest heavy bomber offensive since World War II. The operation was controversial, costly, and its strategic value remains debated by historians to this day. But it demonstrated something undeniable. The B-52, built for a war against the Soviet Union that never came, had become one of the most consequential weapons of the wars America actually fought. Before we continue, let's take a closer look at the aircraft at the center of this story. The Boeing B-52 Stratofortress, the longest-serving military aircraft in American history. Role: long-range strategic bomber, originally designed to deliver nuclear weapons to the Soviet Union. Now used for conventional bombing, precision strikes, and strategic deterrence. Wingspan: 185 feet. Length: 159 feet. 8, not 4, not 2. 8 turbofan engines, mounted in 4 twin pods beneath the wings. Maximum speed: 650 miles per hour. Service ceiling: 50,000 feet. Range: 8,800 miles without refueling. With aerial refueling, the B-52 can fly virtually anywhere on Earth and strike virtually any target. Payload: up to 70,000 pounds of weapons, bombs, cruise missiles, precision-guided munitions. First flew in 1952. Entered service in 1955. The Air Force plans to keep the B-52 flying until at least 2050, nearly a century after the first prototype left the ground. No other combat aircraft in history has served that long. Now, let's get back to our story. By the 1990s, most Cold War-era aircraft were being retired. The B-52's contemporaries, the B-58 Hustler, the B-47 Stratojet, dozens of other aircraft from the same generation, had long since been sent to museums or scrapped. Newer bombers, like the B-1 Lancer and the B-2 Spirit, were supposed to eventually replace the B-52 entirely. It never happened. The B-52 flew in the Gulf War in 1991, launching the opening cruise missile strikes of the campaign and flying conventional bombing missions throughout the conflict. It flew over Kosovo in 1999. It flew in Afghanistan starting in 2001. It flew in Iraq in 2003. As recently as the past few years, B-52s have continued flying combat and deterrence missions around the world. The reasons the B-52 has outlasted its intended replacements are practical rather than sentimental. The aircraft's massive payload capacity and long range make it exceptionally cost-effective for certain missions, particularly conventional bombing and cruise missile launches, where stealth is less important than raw carrying capacity. Its airframe, built to extraordinary structural standards in the 1950s and 60s, has proven remarkably durable and adaptable to new weapons systems and electronics that its original designers could never have imagined. The Air Force has continuously modernized the B-52's internal systems: radar, avionics, weapons integration, communications, while keeping the fundamental airframe largely unchanged. It is, in effect, a 1960s airframe running 21st century technology. In 2021, the Air Force began a major re-engining program, replacing the B-52's original engines with new, more efficient Rolls-Royce turbofans. Engines expected to keep the aircraft flying reliably for decades to come. Some of the B-52's flying combat missions today are the exact same individual aircraft, the same airframes, the same tail numbers, that flew over Vietnam more than 50 years ago. The pilots flying them were not yet born when their aircraft first went to war. The Air Force's current plan calls for the B-52 to remain in active service until at least 2050. If that timeline holds, individual B-52 airframes built in the early 1960s will still be flying combat and deterrence missions nearly 90 years after they were manufactured. No other aircraft in the history of aviation has come close to that kind of service life. Military analysts sometimes describe the B-52 using an analogy. Imagine an aircraft carrier commissioned in the 1950s that was still an active, frontline warship in 2050. Or a nuclear submarine from the same era, still patrolling today. In naval terms, it would be almost unthinkable. In the case of the B-52, it has simply become reality. The aircraft's longevity says something about the engineering of the 1950s, an era when American industry built for durability and overcapacity rather than planned obsolescence. It also says something about the nature of strategic bombing itself. The fundamental physics of carrying large payloads over long distances hasn't changed as dramatically as other areas of military technology. A modern fighter jet from 1955 would be catastrophically outmatched by a modern fighter today. A B-52 from 1961, with modernized engines and avionics, can still perform its core mission as effectively as newer aircraft, sometimes more effectively, given its unmatched payload and range. In 1952, a Boeing engineering team built an aircraft to fight a war that never came. Instead, it fought nearly every war that did come: Vietnam, the Gulf War, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq. And it is still flying today, still being modernized, still expected to remain in service for another quarter century. The B-52 Stratofortress was never the fastest aircraft in the sky. It was never the most maneuverable, or the stealthiest, or the most technologically advanced. It was simply built right, built to carry enormous weight, enormous distances, and built to last far longer than anyone in 1952 could have imagined. Somewhere right now, a B-52 built during the Eisenhower administration is airborne, flown by a crew whose parents may not have been born when that aircraft first took flight. It is in every sense that matters, still doing exactly what it was built to do. If you'd like to support this project, the link is in the description below. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. We'll see you on the next flight.